Welcome back, family, to another wonderful episode of the Grateful Together podcast. I am so happy that you decided to tune in. Before I get into this episode, I do just want to thank each and every one of you for the likes, for the comments, for the shares. Continue to share, continue to like, continue to just be a part of this family as you feel led to. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you for each and every person who has been a part of this journey and has continuously been supporting this ministry. But with no further ado, let's get into this message today. I do want to forewarn you that it's going to be a little bit long, okay? Today, I just want to dissect some information and help you to understand Joseph. I'm going to be in Genesis 37 and ending in 45, I believe. Let me check. You may hear me fumbling through my pages in my Bible. Because that's how much I'm going to be ending in 46. So it's going to be a little lengthy, but I encourage you to listen as you feel led to. And I pray that this speaks to you the same way that it has spoken to me. So basically what this podcast episode is going to be about is allowing God to build your character in the stretch. And I was reminded of not only Joseph, but I was reminded of what I'm going through in these trying times because God is testing me. And being completely transparent, I have not been passing my tests, and a lot of it has just been God revealing my character. Previously, God has revealed to me that I have a pessimistic attitude about things, that I always tend to see the worst outcome, and I never consider. Excuse me, because I'm getting teary-eyed, but I have always been able to see the bad side of things, and I never resort to thinking that things are going to work out. And I know that I have valid reasons as to why I am that way, but God has been doing such a work in me and reminding me that His ways are not our ways, right? And y'all forgive me because I'm trying to keep it together, okay? But our ways are not God's ways. His thoughts, His plans, His things for us they're not going to come to you the way that you think they're going to. And I've been consistently reminded of that through this whole journey. It's easy to sit here and say, God's doing a new thing. Do you not perceive it? But when you think about the time and the habits that you have learned and the way that God has to stretch you to help you unlearn those habits. And you have to remember that God is gracious, so we can close the door of shame. Like, you don't have to be ashamed that you have failed the test, but you have to know that God wants you to stretch. He wants you to rise and come up higher in order to understand what He is doing. You have to partner with Him, not man. If God leads someone to you to speak a word to you, then that is fine and dandy, but don't go looking towards people and other things, holding them as idols, trying to figure out what God is saying, because you have the power within you to come up higher and dive deeper into your walk with God. Okay? Y'all gonna hear me like trying to get it together. Okay? Because this has definitely been an eye-opener for me, and as you can hear, I'm already like breaking down about it, but we're gonna keep it moving. This is what this is about. I'm never afraid to be honest and open about my journey and who I am and how I'm walking with Christ. And like I said, hearing that God has told me that I had a pessimistic attitude was that was one of the moments, and I can be honest with this because I've already talked about it with God and everything, and I'm not ashamed to admit it, because that's what God calls us to do, to be open and honest with Him, to let Him in and let Him cast out those thoughts of what we, drive out that unbelief. So if we look at the word pessimistic and see what that means, we see that a pessimistic person is a person that is tending to see the worst aspects of things or believe that the worst will happen. That is who God revealed that I was. So, and that's why I said, this episode is going to be about allowing God to build your character. And God has tested me for 3 days, and it was based off of my character. God was testing my character. And each time I felt tremendously, because I moved hastily, first of all, went back to places, peoples, and things, doing things that God has told me to refrain from. because I was thinking negatively and I felt like I had to swoop in and be the answer, and I forgot who I was. I am not God. You have to know that God is God. You have to move out of God's way and let him do a work in you so that you can walk into the promises that he has for you. Because if you are consistently running back to the things that God has called, you have to, for one, something that God has been pressing on me is to remember him. And it's so easy to sit here and say, oh, I'll never forget you. And God, I will. And you guys, can you imagine? Oh, sorry, I'm still trying to get it together. Okay, give me a second. But can you imagine God telling you that you're going to betray him, just like with Judas at the Last Supper, right? Or Peter, and God says, you're going to deny me 3 times before the rooster crows. And you're like, no, I'm not going to deny me, Lord. Not me. I would never. And sadly, I felt that test, and you can hear how distraught I am about it because deception crept in really fast. I was blinded, and obviously, I've learned, okay? But God had tested me to show me my character because I really didn't believe that I was a pessimistic person. I felt like I was optimistic, I was enduring, and God said, no, you're none of those things. Like, you inspired to be that way. And something that I always remember too, or that I try to keep hold to now, is when God said that the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. So you have to fast. And I told you guys, I did a 7-day fast, right? And so when that 7-day fast was going on, I was being tested, and it came to the final test, and I passed. I failed each and every one of those. And I have been just like distraught about it because I'm just like, Lord, what? But God is gracious, right? And God had reminded me that, stop trying to figure it out. Stop trying to do things in your will, and just understand that you have to lean on me and partner with me because I will help you. Stop going based off of what you see and stand in faith. And so that's why I want to talk to you guys today about. So I just want to give a disclaimer. Like I said, I'm already breaking down and emotional about this. So I'm praying that I can keep it together. You may hear me, getting weary, but it's all good because God is gracious, and I'm so thankful for the grace that God gives me that I can close the door on shame, and I don't have to hide and run away from being disobedient or just trying to do things in my own strength, because it takes time. And this is why it's important to know that when God allows trouble to come, that trouble is to stretch you, is to teach you. You don't know you the way you think you do. And like I said, I did not believe that I was a pessimistic person. But honestly, when I look back over it, I'm like, I am. The way I've been stressing about things that God has already told me to just relax about. And I'm just like, it's like a joke. How can I sit here and be like, oh God, I'm not pessimistic, but in the moment when I'm faced with trouble, I'm literally resorting to the worst things that could happen. So, and you got to know that God is not a man that he shall lie, So let's get into this with no further ado, because we're already 8 minutes in. Like I said, this is most likely going to be a little lengthy because I have a few chapters to cover, but I hope that you grab each and every one. I do encourage you guys. Something that I've been doing also is I have me a journal now to do my Bible studies in when I'm doing it by myself. And I recommend reading your word daily and taking note, not just writing it down, but writing it in your hearts and writing it in your mind so that you remember when you go out and you're tempted by the test or deception, that you can plead the blood of Jesus and you can remember the word that God spoke to you about what he's doing in and out of your life. So that is what I did today. I sat down. I actually started in Hebrews 11:11, and then I thought about just Joseph. For some reason, I got led to Joseph, and then I've read his story from start to finish. But today I haven't seen it in a different light because I realized that this is what God was doing. God has been building my character up to change me from being pessimistic to being optimistic, to seeing things through, to not always quitting because things don't look like what God spoke. And so that's what I want to encourage you to do. To just take notes, get your Bibles, highlight these things, write these things down, keep note. I have so many sticky notes of different Bible verses around so I can see them, but don't just see them, remember them, place them in your heart and remember what God spoke. So let's get into it. So we're going to start off in Genesis 37, where it talks about Joseph's dream. So we're going to start in the beginning and we're going to walk this thing out. Be patient and gracious towards me, please, because this is going to be a lot. I'm already knowing it. Like I said, it's like 6 or 7 chapters. So there's a lot, but there are so many good things in here that I don't want to miss out on, or I don't want you to miss out on. So I just want to go ahead with no further ado and get started. So the first place I want to start is in 37 verse 2. I want to drop down. I highlighted something that I thought was very important. It says that Joseph tended sheep with his brothers. Okay. The reason I highlighted this is because it reminded me of David, the least likely candidate, right? Joseph is also the least likely candidate. According to man, David's father and his, even Samuel, when God told Samuel to go down to Jesse's house and anoint one of the sons, and he tipped the thing over and the oil did not pour out, and God reminded him that do not judge man on his outer, I judge by the heart. We don't judge people the way that we should. We look at the outer when God doesn't look at our outer. We could be the prettiest thing on this earth, but if you don't have a pure heart, then you're not who God is going to choose. And that doesn't mean that you are not qualified, because God qualifies everybody, but he's going to use the most discounted person. And that's what we see here. David was used, he was out tending to sheep, and even when he got anointed, even when he got anointed, he wasn't even in the place where they went looking for him. He was out tending to sheep. So I thought that this is important to get some context to know. Joseph was also tending sheep with his brothers. What was David doing? David was out tending sheep with his brothers because, and I think he was like sending, anyways, yes, he was tending sheep. Okay. And so I thought that was very important because it lets you know, okay, this is an average person, the least likely candidate. And so jumping down to verse 3, it says, now Israel loved Joseph more than his other sons because Joseph was a son born to him in his old age, and he made a long sleeve robe for him. Jumping down to verse 5, when Joseph had a dream, then Joseph had a dream. When he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. So just giving you some context, because I kind of jumped around. In 4, it says, when his brothers saw that their fathers loved him more than all his other brothers, they hated him. They could not bring themselves to speak peaceably to him. So they hated him because he was favored. Okay, they hated him because his father favored him over the other brothers. And so you jump down and you see that Joseph had a dream. He told his brothers about it, and the dream that he revealed to them, it caused them to build up more hatred in him even more. This also reminded me that God allowed them to have this hatred. God allowed them to have this hated heart or hardened heart towards his brother. And the reason I say that, and you'll see how it connects in the end when he says that God allowed God allowed me to be thrown into slavery. This was God's doing the whole time. But it reminded me of Pharaoh. Okay. It reminded me of when Pharaoh's heart was hardened towards Moses and the Israelites, and he grew so deep in anger that he let the Israelites go. But he also, in his own hatred, went and ended up following them and killed all of his people. They drowned in the water. God allowed that. So I thought this is very important because it ties in perfectly. And then mind you, this all takes place, or it's going to be set out in Egypt. And what I wrote down also is that Egypt is known as a place of bondage. When you think about the Israelites, think about Abram when he went off, there was a famine and he was led to Egypt. And then the whole thing happened with Sarah when he told her, like, oh girl, you so fine. You so fine. They gonna think they gonna want you, so let them know that you my sister. You know what I'm saying? Let them know you my sister, because if they see you, they gonna kill me because you so fine, which was crazy, but he did it, and also just looking at the context of Joseph. So I put that Egypt is known as a place of bondage, but God changes the idea of what Egypt is in the end, and I'll get into that. But I thought that was very important to know context, because he was sold into slavery in Egypt. The Israelites were in Egypt. Abraham left in the famine that was in Egypt. Okay, you see how it all ties together, right? Okay, so let's continue. So moving down to verse 10, it says, he told his father and his brothers, he told his father and brothers, and his father rebuked him. What kind of dream is this that you have had? He said, Am I and your mother and your brothers really going to come and bow down to the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. So just giving you context here, David had two dreams, I believe. Let me make sure that's correct. He had two dreams. Yep. He had one dream, then he had another dream. So the first dream he had, he told his brothers. The second dream he had, he told his brothers and his father. The father didn't hate him, but the father kept it in mind because he's like, what? We really gonna bow down to you? Huh? And the brothers continued to build up the hate. You got to know that God was in the midst of this. So let's keep moving right along. Just kind of giving you some context. So moving on over into verse 18. This is where it starts. Joseph is sold into slavery. He's sold into slavery by his brothers, the brothers that hated him, okay? So in verse 18, it says, they saw him in the distance. This is when the dad, Jacob or Israel, sends him to the brothers. He asks him, are you ready to go? And he says, I'm ready. And he says, go check on your brothers. So he's going out to check on his brothers. Whole time he's going to check on his brothers, and his brothers they see him in the distance and they're plotting to kill him. So this is where we're at. So in verse 18, it says, they saw him in the distance, and before he had reached them, they plotted to kill him. Verse 19, they said to one another, oh, look, here comes that dream expert. 20, so now, come on, let's kill him and throw him into one of the pits. We can say that a vicious animal ate him. Then we'll see what becomes of his dreams. And I just want to pause right here because, like I told you guys, and a lot of y'all really didn't listen to it. As I can see, it don't have many views, but that's all good, okay? Because God's word is God's word. But this just comes back to what I said a couple of days ago to and this just ties in by the grace of God to check your heart and not feel like you got to seek vengeance out on your enemies, because your enemies hate you so much, but these are going to be the same people in the end that God may call you back to bless. And that's a test. And this is what you're going to see in Joseph's story. But what I wanted to highlight was you got to start keeping stuff to yourself. If you don't feel led to share it, don't share it. Obviously, in this text, it was meant for him to share it because this was a part of the plot, right? This is a part of what set Joseph up. The brothers were allowed to have a hardened heart because of the elevation that God had on Joseph's life. And they were so hardened towards him and hated him so bad. I can't talk today. Grace, you guys. They hated him so bad that they was plotting to kill him, but just like God, he turned that thing around and said, nope, he's not going to die. He's going to be sold into slavery. And he ends up walking into the very thing that God had set aside for him. But what I'm saying is you got to be cautious with who you're telling your plans to. Like the word says, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Sometimes all the time, not sometimes, all the times when you do end up prematurely telling something, God works that thing out for you. So you end up in the long run saying like, dang, I wish I would have told that person. But then when you get to the end of it, you look back and you say, well, you know what? I'm glad I shared that with you because that walked me right into my blessing. And the highlight for me, what happened to me recently, is somebody was having a conversation about me to my family members, and the family member ended up sending me a blessing. And I literally said that same thing. I said, at first I was like, well, dang, I should have kept my mouth closed. I shouldn't have said nothing to nobody about nothing. But then I said, you know what? Because God turned that thing around. He used what somebody tried to tear me up about, tried to throw me in the dirt about, tried to make me seem like, oh no, it ain't what it is. And that's the person that they were trying to depict my character to ended up sending me a blessing that I needed, that I didn't ask for, but God knew. So you got to let your enemies do what they going to do, because they will be the ones that walk you right into the place that God has for you. They will be the helper to walk you right into provision. And if you do not believe me, keep reading, keep listening. And I hope you are writing these verses down and reading along, because it's nothing like being a hearer of the word, but also be a doer. So remember to highlight, to take notes and place this in your heart. Don't just listen to an encouraging sermon and be fulfilled. Continue to practice this outside of listening to videos and sermons on Sunday. Practice it every day. And even if it's just repeating one thing, Romans 8:28, all things work together for the good of those who love Christ. Repeat whatever you need to do and go with your day. Take God with you each and every place. So I don't know who that was for, but hey. So getting back on track. So yeah, we see that they decided to kill him, and then they put him in the like this place, this little hole or whatever. But they ended up deciding like, no, let's not do that. Let's just, not shed blood. Let's just sell him into slavery. So we see that in verse 27. It says, come on, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay a hand on him, for he is our brother, our own flesh. And his brothers agreed. Isn't that crazy? His own blood. But let me tell you something. God is no respecter of men. Sometimes it be your own people, and that's okay. You just got to learn to do and be okay with what God allows. So running over to chapter 39. So we already have context. In the beginning, Joseph gets these dreams. He tells them to the brothers. The brothers already hate him as he tells the dream that he's going to be exalted, and the brothers are not. They end up hating him even more. They plot to kill him, but ended up sparing his life and just selling him into slavery. So jumping over to verse 2 in chapter 39, where Joseph is in Potiphar's house. So this is where he's already been sold and everything. So verse 2 says, the Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, serving in the household of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord made everything he did successful, Joseph found favor with his master and became his personal attendant. Excuse me. Potiphar also put him in charge of his household and placed all that he owned under his authority. From the time that he put him in charge of his household and all of that he owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house because of Joseph. The Lord's blessing was on all that he owned, in his house and in his fields. He left all that he owned under Joseph's authority. He did not concern himself with anything except the food he ate. So basically what this is saying is Joseph is now thrown into slavery, but because God was with Joseph, God allowed Potiphar to see favor in Joseph, and he deemed him as respectable and honorable. So something that was meant to kill Joseph was the very thing that God used it to begin his process of being exalted. But as you quickly see, as you think that things are about to turn for the better for Joseph, and I'm pretty sure Joseph probably thought, okay, my life is really finna take a toll. I'm finna get up out of here. I'm, finna reign or whatever. I'm finna be set free. The very moment where God started elevating him, here comes temptation. Here comes the enemy. Here comes deception. Here comes those brothers, say, quote unquote. They're not really the brothers, but the thieves, the haters, right? So, jumping over, still in chapter 39, verse 17. So this talks about Potiphar's wife. So it talks about the Potiphar's wife. So she started seeing Joseph, liked him, thought he was handsome, and she told him, sleep with me, but he refused. Okay. So, I'm not going to get into all of that, but jumping down to 17, it says, then she told him, wait, I ain't going to get into all that because you need context. Okay. So basically his wife was trying to come on to Joseph. Joseph refused because he said, I'm honorable, I'm respected, and I respect your husband, and nothing is off limits to me except for you. So I'm going to honor that because he honors me. The wife did not want to hear that. She continued to pursue him, but it never went anywhere. And then one day he was in there cleaning by himself, and she pulled him into the room and tried to sleep with him, and he refused. So she took his garment. He ran out. She screamed and tried to act like, he tried to, touch me inappropriately. Excuse me. Whew, sorry, guys. She ends up creating this whole story. So that's where you're going to see me jump on to right now in verse 17. So it says, then she told him the same story because let me tell you something. When the enemy has a story about you, it'll be consistent. They won't have to remember what they said because they plotted it. So when he ran out, she wanted to save herself. So because she's like, I can't, be seen as this person. This my husband's house, and I'm his wife, and I can't be seen as treacherous. So I gotta come up with a plan to save myself, and that's exactly what she did. She covered herself, but in the midst, she ended up getting Joseph thrown back in prison. Okay, so let's see where she where this started off from. Okay, so verse 11, 39:11. Now one day he went into the house to do his work, and none of the household servants were there. There were no witnesses, okay? So he was there alone with the wife. She grabbed him by his garment and said, "Sleep with me." But leaving his garment in her hand, he escaped and ran outside. When she saw that he had left his garment with her and had run outside, she called her household servants. "Look," she said to them, "my husband brought a Hebrew man to make fools of us. He came to me so he could sleep with me, and I screamed as loud as I could. And when he heard me screaming for help, he left his garments beside me and ran outside." And so where I picked up at was 17, because when I saw this part, I'm like, of course she gonna tell the same story. So jumping back to 17. Then she told him the same story. "The Hebrew slave you brought to us came to make a fool of me." So the story was consistent. You told your household people this one story, and then you went to your husband and gave another consistent story. So obviously the husband like, okay, well, this got to be true, because this is the same thing they saying happened. This is what she's saying happened, and this is my wife. I honor her. So I'm gonna go with what my wife say. Obviously the wife knew that, so I thought that was important, because it says she told him the same story. Her story, her lie was consistent. But again, you have to know that in this moment, this was also setting Joseph up to be exalted, to be used in a way that he thought it was going to happen another. He thought he was going to continue to go up. And just when he thought he was going to be elevated immediately, he was brought back down. But God is doing a work in his character to say, even when you think that it's about to go one way, are you still going to trust me? Are you still going to know that I am still with you? Because remember, Joseph was not alone when he got sold into slavery. That's how he got where he was in this moment. God exalted him and favored him through Potiphar, because God was with him. And I want to encourage you, to remind you that God is with you in your moments of being stretched, in the building of your character. God is with you. He's not doing this to hurt you. He's doing it to show you yourself, to see your characteristics. Like I said, it's nothing like sitting before God saying, "God, I would never betray you. God, I would never. We talk about Eve all the time. I don't see how she did it, but we're deceived every day. And God is still gracious. So continue to have grace over yourself, but never be too ashamed and too exalted to repent and be humble before God, because he is gracious. The things that he is showing you is to help you, to push you into purpose. And you may not want to hear that, but it is the God honest truth. And I'm telling you it right here from the word of God. Okay. So moving right along, jumping down to verse 20. It says, or 19, when his masters heard the story, his wife told him, "These are the things your slave did to me." So she goes on and tells him what happens. He was furious. 20, and he was furious and had him thrown into prison, where the king's prisoners were confined. So Joseph was there in prison. So we see that Joseph was hated by his brothers. He was questionable to his daddy. He was originally planned to be killed, but he ended up being just spared and thrown into jail. And when you think about, like, okay, so you're telling me that versus them killing me, they spared me and threw me into slavery, which one was better? Sometimes we have that, and that me as being a person who tends to think pessimistically, I would have been like, "Lord, you could have just killed me, because this gotta be worse than death. I'd rather be in the house of you." But that's what thinking negatively does. You look at the worst outcome. Had Joseph would have seen this as a bad thing the whole time, he probably wouldn't have even been able to walk into the promises that God had for him, because he would have still been in that bondage mindset. So in the moments where he was this close, thinking that he was about to be exalted or moved out or set free, God says, "No, I'm going to bring you back down so I can still see. I'm testing your character." That's what this is all about. It's about God testing your character. And so as we jump down to verse 21, it says Joseph in prison. But the Lord was with Joseph. Come on, the Lord is still with him. And sometimes I tell you guys, you got to remember that despite what you're going through, God is indeed with you. Just like the fiery furnace with the Hebrew boys, God is with them. He was with them. He got them out untouched and unharmed. The same way he got them out is the same way he's going to bring you out. God is with you the same way he was with Joseph in prison, the same way he was with Joseph in Egypt when he was sold by his brothers, his own blood. Don't take that lightly. And so 21 again. But the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him. He granted him favor with the prison warden. The warden put all the prisoners who were in the prison under Joseph's authority, and he was responsible for everything that was done there. The warden did not bother with anything under Joseph's authority because the Lord was with him, and the Lord made everything that he did successful. So even in the prison, Joseph was still being built. He was still being exalted. And some of us may look at it like, oh, ain't no way in the world he was exalted in no prison. He was. Like, he was in authority. He was like basically like a prison guard. How you a prisoner in there exalted and you sitting with the security guards, right? But that's what God's favor will do. He will keep you safe. When you're in the lion's den, he will bring you out unbit, uneaten, unharmed. That's who the God we have today is. So you got to know that whatever you're going through, it's to build your character. Let him build your character. Stretch further and endure. And so jumping down is in chapter 20 where it talks about Joseph interprets two prisoners' dreams. So there's there's a cupbearer and a chief baker. They have two dreams. Basically, they don't know what they mean. And so I thought this was so profound. So, like I said, he's still in prison. He's with the cupbearer and the baker, and they were confined because they upset Pharaoh or something, and they had two different dreams. They had two different meanings, but it was a prophetic of what was coming, what was going to happen in 3 days to both of them. And so, in verse 6, it says, when Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they looked distraught. Let's take a look at that word distraught. Because when I looked at it, I'm just like, man, listen. If I'm in prison, if I'm being thrown in prison by the person that I once was serving, and I don't know what's going to happen, this person has authority to kill me, I would be distraught too. Not only would I be distraught, but you got to wonder, like, with Joseph, what you got going on that you're not distraught? Like, how you gonna talk about why y'all distraught? Like, that just blew my mind because I'm just like, Joseph, we're all confined. And so the word distraught means agitated with doubt or mental conflict or pain. Like, they were in there going crazy because they're like, they don't know what happened. And mind you, Joseph is also in the same confinement. So it's just like, how you got joy? And it makes you wonder. And when I was reading this, I thought about that song where it says, make no difference what you're going through. You're gonna make it. God's gonna see you through. Hold your head up. Put a smile on your face. This is another test. It won't last always. So get ready. Get ready for your blessing. That's basically what Joseph was saying to them. Like, why y'all in here looking all crazy? And so, jumping down to verse 7, it says, so he asked Pharaoh's officers who were in custody with him in his master's house. Pause. I tell you guys all the time, anytime the Lord puts something in the Bible or something is written in the Bible, you know it's there for context. Like I said, when I saw him say he saw that they looked distraught, and then he asked them, why do you look so sad today? What you mean why I look sad? I'm in here going crazy because I don't know what's going to happen. But you're also in here as a prisoner. Yeah, you're exalted, but you're in bondage just like me. You're confined. So why do we have two different outlooks about this? Again, you got to change your mindset, change your perspective, because even in that, they're all prisoners, and it lets you know that. So he asked Pharaoh's officers. These are people who were officials who are now being confined in Pharaoh's house as prisoners. Joseph was also an officer once in this place, but because the wife was trying to cover herself, she got him thrown in prison. So you got to remember that what the enemy intends for evil, God turns around for good. So they're all kept prisoners in this confinement in their master's house. And so Joseph said, why do you look so sad today? And like I said, you have to just change your perspective of seeing things. See your way out, even when you don't see a way out. Joseph could have been in distraught with them because he's like, okay, well, I done been sold into slavery. My brothers tried to kill me, but they spared me and threw me into slavery. And then I thought I was coming up, but then the wife tried to sleep with me. And mind you, in that he does say that he's innocent, but not one time did he ever feel the need to defend himself. And I feel like, in my own opinion, that was because the Lord was with him, and the Lord didn't even grieve him enough to even ponder on that, because that wasn't important. Because what the wife did was just a part of the plan. And so Joseph ended up interpreting their dreams and letting them know that basically, one of you are going to be restored back to your position, and the other one, you're going to be fed to the birds. They're going to hang you. Like, your head is going to be hung for the birds to pluck and eat. And in 3 days, and that's surely what came to pass. And so he told them, when all goes well for you, down in verse 14, when all goes well for you, remember that I was with you. Please show kindness to me by mentioning me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. So here we are again, where Joseph is thrown into prison, but yet he is exalted because he is of the authority in the prison, and he sees his way out. He thinks that it's about to go out. He's about to go out, and God's going to exalt him and bring him and set him free. But let me tell you what happens. It don't happen that way. Right then and there, they forget him. They didn't remember him. And he lets them know, like, I was kidnapped from the land of the Hebrews. But really, he wasn't kidnapped. He was sold into slavery. And even more, here, I have done nothing that they should put me in the dungeon. He explains that I'm innocent, but yet, for some reason, I'm in this mess. And that's why I said, sometimes it's the people closest to you. Sometimes it's the people that's connected to you. They will throw you in the pit, but you got to know that God is the way out. He will get you out. So, again, he lets them know, like, don't forget me. And what he spoke surely came to pass, but he was not remembered in that moment. So, jumping down to 23, chapter 40, verse 23, it says, yet the chief cupbearer did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. Like many of us, when we get to the promised land, we forget God. That's the same way the cupbearer forgot him. So it's like, you got what you wanted, and I, blessed you and prepared you for what was about to happen. Now you're restored to your position. So you don't care about me down here in prison. You forgot about me. Remember God always, okay? So jumping down to chapter 41, where it says Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dream, because now, and again, you got to remember that this is all being set up for a bigger cause, right? So he's in prison interpreting 2 different dreams by people who were once officials in the land, in the master's house, but now they're being like on trial, and one of them is about to die, but one of them is still out. So he didn't remember him at first, but jumping down to chapter 41, verse 9, it says, then the chief cupbearer said to Pharaoh, today I remember my faults. So he's basically saying, like, I've come to my senses. Oh, I remember this dude. I was in prison. You got mad at me. You threw me in there, and I had 2 dreams. Like, I had a dream, and the chief baker had a dream, but we didn't know what it meant. And he remembers. He says, I remember all of this. And then he says, there was this dude that interpreted my dreams. And so jumping down to 14, it says, then Pharaoh sent for Joseph, and they quickly brought him from the dungeon. He shaved, changed his clothes, and went to Pharaoh. And I want to stop and put a lot of emphasis on this part right here. You got to change your perspective. Not only change your perspective, but prepare for where it is that God is about to send you. You got to change your clothes. You got to clean yourself up. You got to be ready to be presented to the very thing that God is calling you to. Even if you don't think that this is the time, or you're going to be brought out, even if you feel like it's going to be a disappointment, even if you feel like, okay, this is just another letdown, you got to go in this thing with an optimistic mindset. Don't be pessimistic thinking that, oh, well, this is just another false hope. This is just another false dream. I tried this in the past and it didn't work, because he did try it in the past. He was almost exalted up to where he thought he was going to be, in that very moment he was knocked down. And then again, he's down there in the prison, interpreting dreams in authority, thinking he's finna get out. And again, the cupbearer did not remember him. He indeed forgot him. It's written, okay? So, and I thought this was important because, like I told you guys in the beginning, Joseph was a sheep tender. David was a sheep tender. He was not where he was supposed to be, at Jesse's house, when Samuel went to anoint him. But Samuel sent for David. The same way that Pharaoh sent for Joseph. Come on. And they quickly, fast, suddenly brought him from the dungeon. Okay? They went and got him from the pit. They pulled him up out of what was meant to kill him and cleaned him up. Let me tell you something. Joseph knew this moment could change my life, so I'm going to be prepared. I'm finna shave. I'm finna change my clothes, and I'm finna go to Pharaoh. I'm not finna go to Pharaoh looking like no prisoner. I am not a prisoner. I'm exalted because the Lord is with me. So you got to do what it is that God has called you to do. So when he calls you, when he sends for you, when that opportunity comes knocking at your door, you are prepared and you don't look like you're in a pit. You look like you are exalted and optimistic. I wanted to put emphasis on that specifically because he knew in that moment, this could change my life. Whether it work or not, I'm still going to be prepared. I'm going to look the part. And sometimes you got to just fake it till you make it. Okay? So that's 14. So we almost through it, not as long as I was thinking, we got a little ways to go. We almost there. So jumping down, we still in 41, chapter 41. We're going to go over to verse 32. So this is where Joseph comes in and he's interpreting the dreams that God gave him. And so it was just, remembrance that since the dreams was given to Pharaoh twice, it means that the matter has been determined by God and he will carry it out soon. So whatever God speaks to you and he consistently tells you something, you have to know that it's a right now word. Because sometimes I'm like, well, Lord, is this a right now word? This is a later thing. But when God consistently keeps pressing you about something, it's a right now word. So continue to be prepared. So jumping down to where Joseph is exalted. Come on. And let me tell you something. Sometimes you just get a feeling. Sometimes you just feel like, okay, I got to be prepared for this. Because like I told you guys, in 41:14, Joseph prepares. He shaved, he changed his clothes and went to Pharaoh. He went and interpreted his dream. He did what he was supposed to do. Drop down a few verses later in verse 37 where it begins. It says Joseph was exalted. Imagine how he would have went in there and just been like, oh, well, this is what God said. And da. No, Joseph went prepared. And this was the very thing that exalted him. And it was for real this time. He got exalted. Okay. And so jumping down to 39, it says, so Pharaoh said to Joseph. So basically, after he interpreted the dreams, Pharaoh was well pleased. And he asked his servants, like, well, is there any other man like Joseph? But Joseph was set apart. Okay. And that's why he had to go through the characteristic strengths that he's going through because he was set apart. And so they realized that, he the only one, he was one in a million. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. There is none other like you. There's no other like me. Only you can do what God has called you to do. There's a lot of people out here doing things, saying that God told them to do it. Whole time God didn't send them. They really sent you. But that intimidates people sometimes. People who once were inspired by you are not intimidated because you are one of a kind. And they know that. And so you got to stand tall and prepare for the places that God is sending you because he will send you. But are you ready? Okay. So jumping over to verse 48, it says, Joseph gathered all the excess food in the land of Egypt during the 7 years and put it in the cities. He put the food in every city from the fields around it. So Joseph stored up grain in such abundance, like the sand of the sea, that he stopped measuring it because it was beyond measure. And I highlighted this to just let you know that the very thing that God spoke to Pharaoh, because this is what his dream was about, there was going to be 7 years of famine and 7 years of abundance. So Joseph is preparing and storing the abundance correctly so that when the famine comes, they have more than enough. But Joseph was the right man for the job, okay? Just like you are the right person for whatever God has sent you to. You are the person. Don't let fear, doubt in your past provide doubt and worry. Don't succumb to that. Be optimistic when things try to come up against you. Speak life and not death. So I thought that was important because God's abundance, he was able to spread it out and do more. He appointed Joseph because Joseph was the one who could carry it well. Like you carry it well. Carry it. Hold your head up high and be prepared. So then, so he goes in and then, before the years of famine arrived, he had a daughter, and then he had two kids. He had a daughter and a son. So he named his daughter Menaseth. I think that's how you said it. It sounds like the verb forget, Menaseth, is what the Bible says. So Menaseth means God has made me forget all my hardship and my whole family. And I want to put emphasis on my whole family. Want to know why? Because let's start with Abraham, okay? Abraham, where is it? I was looking at it today. Give me a second. I'm going to find it. I think it's in 16. Where God instructed Abraham to leave it was chapter 12, Genesis 12, the call of Abram. The Lord said to Abram, go from your land, your relatives, and your father's house, okay, to take the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse anyone who treats you with contempt, and all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you, okay? And that's why you have to realize it's important for you to go. And you got to leave them relatives behind. You got to leave that land behind. I don't care who it is. Mama, daddy, sister, brother. If they reside on the opposite of God's will for you, you got to leave them behind. And then let's be clear, because in the beginning, Abraham didn't get it right. He took Lot with him. He said, leave your relatives. Lot was his nephew. So he already started off wrong. Then he went into Egypt. God never told him to go to Egypt. He done went to Egypt and gave his wife away to have sex with these other kings because he didn't want to get killed. Doing stuff that God never called him to do, but the promises still stand because God is gracious, okay? So leave them people behind and get on board with what God has called you to. And let me be one to tell you, it's real. It's lonely, okay? When God separates you from your family and from certain friends, but you got to know that it's for your protection, because them people that's in front of you may not be the people. Like in this story alone, his brothers sold him into slavery, not a man off the street, not his brothers, the same ones he shared blood with. Yes, they were technically half brothers. Only the one was his full brother, which was Benjamin, which I don't even care that. I feel like we got the same mama or daddy, whatever. We're brothers and sisters. But everybody don't look at it like that. His brothers sold him into slavery because they hated the calling that God had on his life. So when God tells you to separate, you be obedient, okay? And so he named his firstborn, God has made me forget all my hardship and my whole family. Okay? And then the second son, he had two sons. I'm sorry, he had two sons. So the second son, he named Ephraim, and said, God has made me fruitful in the land of my affliction, in the land of my pain. God made it fruitful. Come on, you got to know that Joseph endured so much pain. Your brothers they hated you from birth, okay? They hated you because they saw how much their father loved him. They hated him. And that hatred grew when they knew that God was going to exalt him. And because they thought that they could deter the plans of God on your life, on his life, they threw that man into a pit and planned to kill him, but then said, no, we're just going to inflict pain on him. We're going to sell him into slavery. He then gets sold into slavery just to be exalted, to be accused of something he didn't do, still innocent, still with God. God was still with Joseph. You got to know this stuff inflicted pain on him, but God allowed him to forget his pain and his whole family. Because sometimes we walk through this with affliction and pain. Think about it. Dang, I left my people behind. You better leave them people behind, because you don't know what God is protecting you from. Now, moving on. So, drop down to 57. It said, every land came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain for the famine, because the famine was so severe in every land. They came to Egypt, and I highlighted that for reference because that lets you know that those brothers are going to return to Egypt, and this is where the test begins. God is testing, or it continues. This is the final test. Like the brothers coming back, because God wants to see, is your heart still hardened towards them, or have you learned that it was never their doing? This was me. I allowed this because I wanted to test your characteristics to see if you would still be a man after me, if you would still do what it is I told you to do and be a man of heart. And so dropping down to 42, where we're talking about Joseph's brothers in Egypt. So in verse 4 of 42, it says, but Jacob did not send Joseph's brothers Benjamin with his brothers, for he thought something might happen to him. So just give you guys context. So Jacob sends the 9 brothers. He has 10 brothers left. So he sends the 9 brothers to go and get grain because there's a famine, right? So he leaves Benjamin at home because out of fear. And I highlight this because fear will sometimes creep you out and you will be holding on to the very thing thinking that you're going to lose it. So because Jacob had lost Joseph, or what he thought he lost, he was too afraid to let go of Benjamin because he said that if he lost the last son of which his wife bore him, he would surely die of sorrow. So he said, no, y'all go. And I'm going to hold tight to my son, but that's what fear do. Fear will have you crippled and holding on to things and not releasing it because you're afraid to lose it. But you got to trust God and know that when you're, whatever it is you let go of, God will protect it. So I thought that was interesting. And so just giving you more, verse 6, it says, Joseph was in charge of the country. He sold grain to all his people. His brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the ground. When Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he treated them like strangers and spoke harshly through them. I highlighted that because that is a fulfilled promise of God. One of the dreams that Joseph had was his brothers bowing down to him. And they said, what is this? I rebuke this because you can't rule over me. But look, God's very word to Joseph came to pass. His brothers were before him, kneeling and bowing. And what did I tell you guys? Since the dream was given to Pharaoh twice, it means that the matter has been determined by God and he will carry it out soon. Let's go back to the beginning because you got to know it's always in the beginnings. Joseph had how many dreams? It says in verse 5 of 37, then Joseph had a dream. You drop down again in verse 9 of 37, it says, then he had another dream. 2 dreams. God determined that this is going to happen soon. So I got to take you through what it is that you don't want to go through because I got to build up your character and you got to let these people go. But when they come back, I want to test your heart to see how you're going to treat them. And so that's what we're seeing here, a fulfilled promise of God. So regardless of how they threw this man into slavery, God's promises still made it where it was supposed to be. That lets you know that God trumps all. God has the final say. Let these people throw you in pits because God will get you out. It's all a part of the plan. And so jumping down to verse 8, it says, although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Because let me tell you something, when you go through that pruning process, when you go through that stretching, when you go through and allow God to prune you of the things that are holding you hostage, he will make you unrecognizable. The very people who once knew your name, who once recognized you, you are unrecognizable to them because you don't look the same way you did pleading for your life in a pit. You don't look the same way you did when you were sold into slavery and you were hurt by your brothers. You don't look the same way you did when you were thrown into prison because somebody innocently dishonored you by lying on you. You don't look the same way you did when they forgot about you when you helped them in the mess. Okay, so God will change your look and make you unrecognizable to the very people who tried to inflict pain on you. God will help you through it and change your look. You will recognize the people that harmed you, but they won't recognize you because God has pruned you and cleaned you up, honey. So I thought that was good. And so jumping down to 13, it says, but they replied, we, your servants, were 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. The youngest is now with our father, and one is no longer living. Speaking of Joseph. And I want to pause right here because this just give you, he asked, and he reports oh, you guys are spies. Obviously, he knows his brothers. He has a whole plan to, I really think that in the beginning, he was going to, try to inflict pain on them, but it was a test of the heart. And so Joseph ended up turning around, and in the end, he ends up saying, I fear God, just do this or whatever, and he forgives them. And I'll go to that in a second. But what I also want to highlight is, can you imagine this man saying, the youngest is now with our father. So Benjamin is with their father. You got us here. And then one is no longer living. Can you imagine somebody coming to your face talking about you dead and you alive and you've been alive this whole time? And the whole time, the reason that you're profound dead is because they tried to kill you. Can you imagine how much pain and hurt that put on Joseph? And I'm going to tell you that it hurt him because there was a few times that he wept. Like, I can imagine somebody looking me dead in my face talking about, yeah, because, such and such had died. And in my mind, like, what? Who died? I'm standing right here, but you can't say nothing because you got to hold your ground. You got to continue to go through what God is doing. And Joseph couldn't reveal at that moment who he was because it wasn't time. But just imagine wanting to speak out and say, oh, dang, I'm not dead, y'all. Can you imagine it? I can't imagine it. So getting back on topic. So, like I said, he's told them that you guys are spies. And so in 15, it says, this is how you will be tested. So he's testing them. Whole time he's testing them, and God is really testing Joseph to see how you're going to treat your brothers. So jumping down, he tested them for 3 days. So in 18, on the third day, Joseph said to them, I fear God. Do this and you will live. So, like I said, he was testing them, but the whole time God was testing his heart to see, are you going to inflict pain on them? Because I told you that this was not their doing, this was my doing. I allowed this, and you are now where I told you once would be, regardless of what happened to you. So know that this was a part of my plan. God turned what the enemy intended for evil and used it for good. And so Joseph came to his senses, and on the third day after the fast, or after the test, Joseph said to them, I fear God. So I'm going to do what God's telling me to do. I'm not going to inflict pain on you guys. I'm not going to seek revenge, because revenge is for the Lord. God is our judge. I am not a person who's going to go against God. He says, I fear God. And then he tells them, like, do this and you will surely live. And so jumping down to 23, it says they did not realize that Joseph understood them, because they're talking like, oh, we've been cursed because we tried to kill our brother. Can you imagine Joseph standing in the distance, hearing them talk about how they plotted to kill this man, and his man alive standing here? And he has the power to kill them or, inflict pain on them, but he chooses to choose God. You got to be a humble person. You got to be a person who has been through the pruning and has really a real heart for God to just say, you know what? I give up. I surrender. I fear God. Let God's will be done in your life. And that's what you see in this moment. So they're whispering and talking about the whole plot against Joseph, and it says that they did not realize that Joseph understood them. Since there was an interpreter between them, he turned away from them and wept. What? He turned away and wept because he can't believe, like, my brothers, like, you really thinking that you were kidnapped the whole time? This was a plot and a twist. They tried to kill you, bro. And so when he turned back and spoke to them, he took Simeon from them and had him bound before their eyes. And so jumping down to the part where he sends them to return home. And so they're talking to their father, and the father says in 36, their father Jacob said to them, it's me that you make childish. Joseph is gone and Simeon is gone. Now you want to take Benjamin? Everything happens to me. And again, that comes back to the pessimistic attitude. Like, he's sitting here just like, oh, this has got to be the worst. I done lost Joseph. Benjamin, I told y'all I wouldn't let him go, but I know he gonna be killed. Simeon, y'all done went and gone and left Simeon. So now I'm finna be out 3 sons. 3 sons because of y'all. But if your will, you do it. And he says, everything is happening to me. And this is what God had revealed, that you gotta change your thought process. You gotta change how you think about it. So the father was definitely a highlight for me, because that made me like, Lord, why is this happening to me? Like, you told me this and you told me that, and this is happening to me. But you got to know that it's all going to work out in your favor. Romans 8:28, it all works together. We see that with Joseph. It all works together. You got to have faith and stand in faith, okay? And so jumping over to chapter 43, verse 14, where it says, may God Almighty cause the man to be merciful to you, so that he will release your other brother and Benjamin to you. As for me, if I am deprived of my sons, then I am deprived. So this is the father still speaking. He decides to let Benjamin go, and he's like, if I lose my sons, then I just lose my sons. I'm just going to die. He told him basically like, if I don't get my son back, I'm just going to die sorrowful life, because I done lost all these children under y'all hands, okay? So moving right along in 23, it says, then the steward said, so Joseph ends up putting the silver back in the bags, and they returned it, and they bought more silver to buy more food. So they was trying to give him like double and all this. So the like Jacob tells him like do this and do this, and to get favor with them. And so they're trying to explain to them like, listen, we pay for our stuff. We don't know how our money got back. And so the servant says, may you be well. Do not be afraid, or don't be afraid. Your God and the God of your father must have put treasure in your bags. I received your silver. Then he brought Simeon out to them. So he's basically telling them like, I got y'all money. Now, I don't know how, by the hand of God, y'all must have got it back, because I know I didn't put it there. But, if you read through this, you'll see that Joseph tells them to put it back, because obviously these are his brothers and his father. So he's like, even in being angry at this point, he's still looking out for them. And so, God allowed him to give them the money back. And so they end up getting their brother back. So jumping down to 29, we see God's grace. Okay. So 29 says, when he looked up and saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, so this is his full brother, he asked, is this your youngest brothers that you told me about? Then he said, may God be gracious to you, my son. And I'm going to show you how God was very gracious to Benjamin in the end. And so Joseph hurried out because he was overcome with emotion for his brother, and he was about to weep. He went into an inner room and wept there. Then he washed his face and came out. Regaining his composure, he said, serve the meal. Because of what? You will have a feast before the feet of your enemies. The table will be set before your enemies. You will eat. His brothers was once his enemy. Now he in there breaking bread with him. It takes a humble person to do that, because these men tried to inflict pain and tried to kill him. It takes a humble person to do this. Nobody but God's grace, okay? And so I want to show you one also thing of God's grace towards Benjamin. So it says that they were served from firstborn to youngest, and then the men looked at each other in astonishment. Like, they couldn't even believe it. Like, what? Like, I can't believe we don't deserve of this. We tried to kill our brother, and now we thought we was going to be thrown into the pit and killed, and now we getting food and getting meals and sitting with the king and the lord of the country. And so in 34, it says, portions were served to them from Joseph's table, and Benjamin's portion was 5 times larger than any of theirs. You got to know the number 5 represents God's grace, right? So, as we read in the previous verse where it says, may God be gracious to you, my son. In 29, he tells him, may God have grace upon you. And we see that down in 34, God had grace on him. He gave him a portion that was 5 times larger. So God was showing you that he had favor and grace upon Benjamin, because that was his, full brother. And so jumping down, closing out, this is where we're going to end it at. We got a little bit more to go. Like I said, thank you guys for sticking with me. I'm hoping that this blesses you the same way it blessed me. But coming down to where it says Joseph's final test, and that's why I say you got to realize that all of this was a test. God was testing and building his characteristics. He was building his character, to changing his mindset from being pessimistic, because that's what he was taught, and really Joseph didn't even have a pessimistic attitude. His father did, though. So it's easy to be holding on to something that you were taught, because you think that, it's okay to do this, because this is what I know. The father had very pessimistic attitude. He was living in fear. He wouldn't even let the younger son get out of the house because he was afraid to lose him. That's what bondage will do. It will keep you holding on to things, but you got to release it and let it go. And so in 44, where it says Joseph's final test, number 9, it says, if it is found with one of us, your servants must die, and the rest of us will become my Lord's slaves. Then the stewards replied, what you have said is right, but only the one who is found to have it will be my slave, and the rest of you will be blameless. So basically, giving you guys a backstory, Joseph plants the scepter in Benjamin's bag, so he's going to keep Benjamin captive, because he's like, go tell them this, and tell them whoever has the bag, I'm going to hold him as my slave, and then the other ones can be set free. But mind you guys, the father told him, if y'all go and don't bring Benjamin back, I surely will die of sorrow, because y'all done took Joseph. Simeon was just held captive. Now, mind you, they got Simeon back, but now he's taking Benjamin captive. But in the end, Joseph ends up giving up. Like, he's just like, you know what? I'm not even gonna do this. And jumping down to 45, he reveals his identity. So it says Joseph could no longer keep his composure in front of all his attendants. So he called out, "Send everyone away from me." No one was with him when he revealed his identity to his brother. But he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard it. And also Pharaoh's house. Like, can you imagine? I can only imagine how loud it was, because you've been holding that in for so long, and then you gotta face these men, and you really like trying to be this vicious person, but that's not who you are. And like you said, you fear God, so you gotta let it go. You gotta have grace upon them. And this is what it shows you. Like, he could have chose the wrong way, but you gotta know that when God intends something for your good, you can't worry about who throwing stones at you, okay? And so, jumping over to 45:4, like I said, we're ending. It says, then Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near me," because they were terrified, y'all. They didn't know what was going to happen. So it says, then Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near me." And they came near. "I am Joseph, your brother," he said, "the one you sold into Egypt. And now don't be grieved or angry with yourselves for selling me here, because God sent me ahead of you to preserve life." You got to know that Joseph stood the test of time. When you look at a situation like that and say that God sent me ahead of you, even though this man was thrown in the pit, he was sold into the slavery, then he was accused of something he didn't do, put into prison, forgotten, then remembered. And God says, now remember me and know that I brought you here. I sent you ahead. It takes humility. It takes pruning. It takes some time for you to have that kind of mindset. And that is what Joseph displays. He tells him, don't be upset with yourself. Have grace over yourself, because the same way I have grace for you, God has grace for you. I have forgiven you. Take heart. I know that it wasn't you that inflicted pain on me. It was used for evil, but it was turned around for good. And so jumping down, it says, God sent me ahead of you to establish you as a remnant within the land and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. Therefore, it was not you who sent me here, but God. And how many of you know that the "but God" is powerful? But God. He has made me a father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household and ruler over all the land of Egypt. Jumping down to 15, it says, Joseph kissed each of his brothers as he wept. And afterward, his brothers talked with him. And so then he tells them, like, go and get dad and come, y'all come, and just come. He tells them to come to the place where he has been exalted. He's going to take care of them. And so in 20, it says, do not be concerned about your belongings, for the best of all the land of Egypt is yours. So don't worry about what you have. Just bring what you can bring and come. Just y'all come. Bring my dad, bring all my brothers. Y'all come. We're going to live happily and merrily, because God has provided vision. He sent me ahead of you guys to take care of you guys. He sent me ahead to be the deliverance for our family. And so in 21, I just highlighted provision. So it says, the son of Israel did this. Joseph gave them wagons as Pharaoh has commanded and gave them provisions for the journey. So not only was Joseph on board with bringing them, but Pharaoh made a lot of provisions for them to get there. Okay. And so 22 says he gave each of the brothers changes of clothes, but he gave Benjamin 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of clothes. There go that number 5 again, grace. Because if we remember, God in 29, it said, may God be gracious to you, my son. He had already given him a larger portion of the food. His food was 5 times greater. That lets you know that God was going to honor what Joseph said, because the Lord was with Joseph. God showed Benjamin favor because Joseph asked for it. And God has still been showing him favor. He gave him a change of clothes, but gave him 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of clothes, which the brother only got a change of clothes. Okay? And it reminds me of what he said with Abram in 12, where he says, bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. But, even though their provision and grace wasn't great as Benjamin's, they still got favor. So I thought that was good. And then lastly, it says, so Joseph sent his brothers on their way to get their dad, right? And so they were leaving. He said to them, don't argue on the way. And so when I read it, I'm like, don't argue. Like, what are they going to argue about? And then I jumped down to where it gives you a definition of what it's saying here. It says, or be anxious. So he's telling them, like, do not be anxious. Do not be afraid. Just go get my dad. Get what you can bring and come back. Like, don't get so afraid that you stay there, because I'm sending you back, but you got to come back. Because sometimes God will send you, come on, Moses. Sometimes God will deliver you from that place and then send you back. Moses could have said, you know what, I'm just going to stay here because Pharaoh not letting go of the people. So I'm just going to stay here with the people. But he didn't. He never gave up. He endured because he knew that God was calling him to call his people out. And so Joseph is letting them know, like, listen, don't argue on the way there. Don't be afraid. Don't be anxious. Don't worry about it. Just come back. Get your things that you can carry, your grandkids, the grandsons, the wives. Bring everybody and let's live happily, right? And so I thought that was good because I'm like, man, listen, God is so good. God is gracious, y'all. He gracious. And lastly, I want to just talk about how, in 46, it says Jacob leaves for Egypt. So they go back to get Jacob. And so Joseph tells them on the way, like, do not be afraid. Don't argue about it. Just go do what I say and come back. And so Israel, or Jacob, God, they went to Beersheba. They're on their way and they're in Beersheba, but Jacob, like, is kind of like weary. He doesn't believe them because obviously he's like, y'all told me my son died. What you talking about? Like, y'all trying to set me up. Like, And so God comes to him and God says, let me start from the beginning. So, in 2, it says, that night God spoke to Israel in a vision. Jacob, Jacob, he said, and Jacob replied, here I am. God said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not be afraid to go down to Egypt, for I will make you into a great nation there. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also bring you back. Joseph will close your eyes when you die. And if you read along, that actually does happen. They send him back, and Joseph, he blesses all his sons before he passed. And I tell you guys all the time, my favorite verse is when Jacob told that last son, Benjamin, you gonna put your foot on these people's necks. Okay? Let me see if I can find that real quick. Oh, Lord. I can't find it. Let me see. Benjamin's a wolf. He says his prey in the morning, he divides the prey, and in the evening, he divides the plunder. But yeah, I think that was it. But it was one thing where he told him, like, you're going to triumph over your enemies. Like, you're going to put your foot on these people's necks. And I was like, man, listen, Jacob, you a real one, bro. Like, but in the end, like in 50, that's when it talks about his burial. And Pharaoh told him, go and bury your father in keeping with your oath. Then Joseph went to bury his father, and all Pharaoh's servants, the elders of his house, and all the other elders of the land of Egypt went with him, along with Joseph's family, his brothers, and his father's family. So yeah. I just thought that was good. And then, of course, this leads us into the Exodus, where, God is our way out. And we also see that God is our way out here because God allowed Joseph to go into slavery. He allowed him to be accused. He allowed him to be afflicted, but God turned all of that around and made him forget it. He forgot whatever happens to him, but he will bring it back and it will be a test. So don't get weary in well doing. Continue to do what God has called you to do and continue to be open about how you feel. Give it to God. Let him work on you. God is still doing the work in me to not have a pessimistic attitude, to turn my pessimisticness into optimisticness, that I can achieve the things that I'm supposed to. And even when it doesn't look like much, God is doing so much on the scenes, behind the scenes. So trust God and surrender it all to him. Like I said, continue to be in your word daily. Continue to go to God yourself. Don't be out here searching for other people's validation and what they're saying, because only God can really tell you what it is he wants you to do. If somebody sends you something, or if God sends that person to tell you the word, then okay, but don't go seeking people's opinions, swaying to and fro. Trust God enough to know that whatever he spoke to you, regardless of who doubts, because Joseph didn't doubt in these times. He just went through it. And it never talked about how he just sat in pain. Even though in the end, it lets you know that he was painful. He did cry. He wept when he saw them, but he held that in for a long time. And then he released it when he finally seen his brothers. So continue to take heart and just open your eyes, change your perspective, and allow God to build your character in the stretch, because it's definitely a test. Don't be like me and be pessimistic about everything. And like I said, he inherited that. He could have inherited it, or he did inherit it from his dad, but it doesn't talk about how he was pessimistic. Joseph never one time, he did say that he was innocent and he was there. So it lets you know that he felt that he knew he wasn't supposed to be there, but he didn't sit on it the same way that Jacob did. Jacob, oh, why is these things happening to me? And if my son go and they never come back, mistake. I'm just going to die in sorrow. But honestly, you know, it's all laughing and fun and jokes. But when God showed you that that's who you are, it's not so funny. Because when God told me that I had a pessimistic attitude, I did not want to receive that thing. I said, Lord, not me. But then I looked at it when my world has been crashing down, and I said, you know what, God, you're right. I have been acting pessimistic. I have been seeing the worst in everything. And God's like, you know, just breathe through it. Talk to me, seek me, and you will find. So I pray that this bless you. Again, I know it was a lot of bit lengthy, okay? But it was definitely worth it. And I pray that it spoke to you the same way it spoke to me. Go out and have a blessed day on purpose. Continue to know that God loves you more. Okay, and I also love you, but God loves you more. Remain grateful because it makes you gorgeous. And I will talk to you guys on the next episode. Bye.